Hello, guys. Welcome to this new edition of Mind Podcast. This is Aadit Kapadia coming to you on yet another week, on a very historic day, should say, for India. And that's why you have two people very passionate about Indian science and technology, space exploration, and in general, I'm going to introduce my guest individually first, but I wanted to do a combined introduction about celebrating a big achievement, Chandrayaan, and the advancement that India has made in science and technology. So we are here to discuss about that and more, and give a historic perspective of that. Together with me is Aashish Chandorkar, author, columnist, and also the counselor at the Permanent Mission of India at WTO in Geneva. And he's a public policy analyst. And today with me is also here as a history connoisseur and someone who feels very passionate about this. So welcome to Mind Podcast again, Ashish. It's been a year since we did this, but welcome back.
Yeah, thanks, Aadit. It's good to be back. It's been a while actually, so good to be back on Mind.
Absolutely. So, first things first, how does it feel? I mean, I know it's a redundant question because, I already said we are all very happy. And if you were living under a rock, just to recap, Chandrayaan 3, India's third lunar exploration, has, under the guidance of ISRO, which has a lander named Vikram and the rover named Pragyan, has landed on the moon. It was launched on July the 14th, 2023, and entered the South Pole region of the moon, making India the first nation successfully to land a spacecraft near the lunar South Pole and the fourth country to successfully soft land on the moon. So how does it feel, Ashish, for this? And then we'll go to the history after this, but initial reactions.
Yeah, I mean, wonderful feeling, Adit, right? Like when Chandrayaan 2 was, that mission was going on and that landing was supposed to happen. Late night India time, right? And I remember that all of us were, and the whole country was kind of waiting for that moment. And there was so much Twitter activity that day, right? Like people were
absolutely
like a mass combined following was going on. So, but that was a disappointing day, despite the best efforts of ISRO. And from that point, coming back strong from that event and learning the right lessons. Of course, I am not really a scientist or an engineer in the sense of the understanding what ISRO would have learned, but clearly, I mean, we use that experience to rebuild the whole team, the whole mission, and so it's incredible. I also saw it on a large screen actually, so it was like a special telecast. So we had screen put up.
No, absolutely. So, I'm not an aeronautical engineer. I'm a civil engineer, but I will tell you one thing, and I wrote a note about this morning. Engineering is not just about successes. People will say congratulate on your successes, and they'll talk about your failures and stuff. Something you're taught, like, to learn from failures, and that's very important. What you said, like that. I remember that day when the director was emotional. The Prime Minister of India hugged, was consoling. I mean, he obviously broke down, and the fact is, from 4 years later, ISRO has done that. This is the victory of every single engineer who was in that room and saw that failure, right? Because they learned from that, and they learned from that to convert it into success. America did the same thing. I mean, there have been missions to moons like 9, 10 times, 12 times, and not all of them have been successful. So how do you do, how do you do that matters. But this moment defines us, right? This moment defines us in what we did. What I want you to talk about is, you have been, like, you were in India, but now the last couple of years you've spent out of India. You've talked to people. You have had this 360-degree overview or some an event like this, which puts up India with four of the best, like, space programs. How does that measure in terms of global impact of this? What have been the reactions so far from what you've talked to people and seen?
Yeah, I see. I think there's a lot of interest. Last time we spoke, I was telling you that there's a lot of interest about India generally, right? Like, people always ask questions about our achievements or what's going on in India in general, our problems sometimes as well. So this kind of an event really redefines the league in which we operate. And as you rightly said, that we're the first country to soft land on the south side of the moon. Then again, only one of the few countries to actually land on the moon at all. So in that sense, that the curiosity then starts turning into more kind of detailed, like quest for understanding more, knowing more, and an admiration for what the country is doing, right? So this thing that we can achieve something like this ahead of everyone else in the world, with all our constraints, all our resource,
Hmm.
constraints or limitations. The fact is that this kind of an achievement goes much further beyond than just a war of words,
Yeah.
a war of lives. And as you talked about the US example, see, again, these events it's not just a scientific achievement, right? It's like a national achievement where it propels
Absolutely.
the imagination of the country, saying this is what we can do, and this is how far we can go. So it also then gets people interested in science, technology in general, and then about doing new things, taking more risks, all of that, right? So it also changes the national character in terms of how people see themselves, what they think that they can achieve, and hopefully then they will go and do even bigger things from here on.
The collective conscience. I said that when there were pictures of kids watching it on Mumbai station, I think there was a picture of
And
that
then
on the big screen, right? I'm like, how many kids are going to get inspired that I want to be there in a few years? I want to be in that room trying to do that. It's amazing. At a time when people are saying that, oh, kids, maybe not enough kids are taking up science and technology and so forth, this is a big sort of thumbs up that, this is an event of national discussion that is happening. And in spite of a million political differences for that one moment, everyone in India was united. At one, not contextualizing and stuff like that. Of course, then everything will follow after. But we are not here to talk about before and after. We are here to talk about that moment alone. And so one thing I want to ask you, Ashish, as someone who observes things, like there are those in the Western media who has started. I mean, there was a BBC report that said, "Oh, why are they doing this? India has 700 million poor people, and they're still landing, rockets on the moon." We always listen to this rubbish, and I've actually tweeted out this morning a clip about, from the West Wing, saying about exploration and stuff and why it's next. And there's one line that hits me, in where he says, there's like, a person there did not go hungry because we decided to go to the moon. They went hungry. Now we have to do something about, alleviating people from the poverty, and and we've done that, or we are in process of doing that, but that doesn't mean we stop other scientific achievements, right? So what would you respond to that?
See, if all problems had to be resolved before you start something, then you would actually never start anything at all, right? So there's always, you cannot judge the life or priorities in a hierarchy of problems. Of course, there is a hierarchy in terms of priorities of what the government should be doing, but you cannot be saying that unless you do 1, 2, 3, you will not get to number 10. The problem is that they all coexist, right? So
Yeah.
you even leave aside the space mission for a while, but let's say you can extrapolate this to anything. You can say, why do you want to make an expressway until some XYZ problem is there, or why do you want to
Yeah.
make invest in defense? So I think this argument is actually it actually belies how systems run, how countries run, right? People will have to start competing areas where you need the focus of the government. It also needs resources, it needs capacities, and all of that. So in that sense, the argument is a little bit of it's probably more like an emotional argument. It's a specious argument. It's probably not intended to be a
And a
serious.
very, and I hate to say this, but a very colonial argument also, that, oh, who are these Indians suddenly coming, there?
Exactly. I mean, uh, these statements essentially also show that people don't understand how a typical governance system works, where you have to do 100 things together. It's a fact
Hmm.
of life. Space, of course.
Absolutely.
Given that you also have to prepare for these things years in advance. I mean, if you're talking about human settlement on moon or even on Mars, people have talked about it.
Hmm.
You have to make a start somewhere. I mean, unless you start, probing that area, unless you make a claim internationally that yes, we also have a stake in this. Let's say, for example, if India did not do this, and if, for example, 5 other countries go and create settlements on moon, right? So then you can, I mean, if you're always the sixth, seventh, or the 10th one, then you don't
Yeah.
get the respect, you don't get the natural kind of way of your, I mean, right of your way in terms of what your viewpoint is, right? You're always like following
Yeah.
someone, or always trying to justify someone else's narrative or fight against it. So in that sense, these are, I think it's not a serious statement when people make arguments like that.
Absolutely. No, I mean, right now we are talking about countries and even corporations launching satellites into space. It's a very common thing. When the research started 20, 30 years ago, people are like, oh, what is this nonsense, about launching satellites in space? When is it going to happen? But it did happen. And guess what? India is doing that too. 23 satellites. What was it? I mean, some ridiculously awesome number. So it's kind of silly that they are focused on that.
Yeah, and again, lot of people, if you remember, there was also this cartoon which today became quite popular. The New York 13 post Mangalyaan cartoon, right, where the farmer with a cow was waiting outside a elite club to be entered in the space domain.
Yeah, absolutely. I tweeted out myself, and I had a response to Miss Tanvi Madan as well on it.
Yeah, so did I. I mean, in the sense, I also tweeted about that because New York Times had they had a breaking news on their app about that fee, right? So the contrast that, okay, fine, if you didn't believe something 10 years ago, but you can believe it now. I mean, it's not that you have to really make New York Times appreciate you, but it's the fact that at least people see that, okay, there's a movement happening, and it's even if it's grudging admiration, or even if it's like forced on you that, okay, but you start taking seriously, saying, okay, fine, India is doing something which should be taken note of.
No, and my point is, just because they are nice to us now for like 5 minutes, we shouldn't forget that they were racist about that Mars mission, with the cows. I mean, it was just ridiculous, right? For today again proves that science, spirituality, religion go hand in hand in India. This is 95 to 99% scientific achievement, but a very strong core of faith, where the scientists also believe in the devout, in the divine, and same for the Indian people. And it was, the chairman of ISRO said that we want to thank everyone who's praying for us and so forth, right? So, but when you mock that culture that we have, where science and religion are not seen separately. In fact, science is seen as so in New York Times, and again, like the whole Abrahamic discussion, where science and religion in some aspects are at war with each other. I don't think India has ever had that problem with Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, Buddhism, so to speak.
I mean, the ISRO scientists themselves went to a temple, right, before the launch. So, I mean, these things always coexist in our society. And when cartoons like that are made, they are probably also, as you rightly said, it's not just about that one project. I think it's a larger mindset which they want to kind of mock or at least just talk ill about. So yeah, I think this kind of a Western narrative. I was just telling someone on Twitter that on X now, not Twitter, but that the nothing succeeds like success. I mean, eventually you keep doing things, and then people will come around and just acknowledge that, okay, fine, things are changing.
Yeah, and they talk about Vikram Sarabhai. Vikram Sarabhai was I have to say this because we talk about religion. He was a scientist, one of India's best scientists, but came from a very devout Jain family, one of the oldest Jain families of Ahmedabad, and we grew up listening to him and stuff. So again, one thing is not in conflict with the other, and so forth. So. Anyways, moving on to a history of where we went. I saw this beautiful picture. I tweeted out the 3 pictures. The first rocket that India, we did in Sriharikota, a scene very shown quite nicely in the show Rocket Boys, where we transported on cycles and carts and so forth, and in some cases even manually launched it, right? From there to here. As a student of India, and I say that is because a lot of us who write, comment on public policies, it's hard to look at the present without putting it on the historical context. India of the 60s was a very different country. The world was fighting in Cold War. There was an arms race and a space race going on between the US and the Soviet Union. And here we had India under 2 remarkable men, Homi Bhabha and Vikram Sarabhai, and their group of amazing scientists doing it. So in historical perspective, what is the significance of this moment? And if you could talk a little bit about where India has come from.
Yeah, so see, the space program started almost like in 1960s, in 1962, right? With this establishment of the International Committee for Space Research.
Yeah.
So that
part.
Yeah, exactly. So in that sense, and of course, an ISRO was set up later in 1969, I think, right? Yeah.
Correct.
So it's been. I mean, so just to kind of put it in perspective, when US was landing on the moon, we were still setting up our organizations, right? So that was the kind of difference
Yeah.
in terms of the trajectories. So of course we didn't start on the front foot. I mean we lagged what other countries were doing, and US and USSR and now later China became the main countries who were very strong in space area. But I mean from there on, and you said about the quality of leadership in that in that domain, and from Homi Bhabha to Vikram Sarabhai to Satish Dhawan, and then U.R. Rao, and then of course Dr. Kalam. A lot of these individuals kept at it despite all the constraints, financial constraints, capability constraints. There were also geopolitical situations at times when some of the programs, I'm sure, would have taken hit due to the various geopolitical alignments or sanctions and stuff like that. So obviously the path has not been very easy in that sense, right? Like it's not that you had everything at your disposal what you wanted to go from one stage to another stage of technological progress, or undertake more complex missions. So it's a bit of a hockey stick curve that a lot of course, satellite launches. We've been launching satellites for a while, but then in the last 10, 15 years, a lot of things have come together, right? In terms of various missions, more ambitious missions. Chandrayaan 1, 2, 3 happened, then Mangalyaan happened. Now we're talking about the mission to the sun, and so Shukrayaan. So I mean, the thing is that once you start building on previous successes, it's a bit like you build a layer on top of the previous progress you make, right? So it may not be very obvious that okay, like someone saying how can India have so much capability, but the fact is that we have been building steadily, even if it's not very, let's say, there are no big announcements happening, or NASA has not run like NASA. We're not running a cool exterior front end to our existence in terms of social media and education programs and videos and all of that, right? But the core capability has been building up over the last years.
Yeah, and you actually bring up an interesting point, because I am I've essentially called two cities my home, and they are intrinsically related. One is Ahmedabad, of course, where the ISRO thing was established in when Vikram Sarabhai. My second city that I call home is Houston, the headquarters of NASA. So I have sort of seen that all my life. So it's in a strange way, it's been very commonplace for me for all my existence about that. And I hope that ISRO can actually have sort of one unit or something like where NASA does, where they invite kids regularly to do this, because I cannot tell you what that has done to change the position that NASA occupies in that. The issue is right now, I think we should capture this moment. ISRO had a very national sort of view on it. We should make it more localized, where they are doing more local camps, so kids can come and see what they are doing, have a few videos and stuff, and that, who knows what that might lead to. And we definitely need a space museum, because our journey is so incredible. I mean, literally from nothing. You are so right. When America was landing astronauts on moon, we were still building our space programs, and we lost two of our best at the age of 52 and 56, Vikram Sarabhai and Homi Bhabha. And I don't want to go into the discussion about their deaths and stuff, because this is not the time to do it. But the question is, we lost them in a very untimely manner, and it was in spite of that we built up based on and if you look at the length of their achievements, given the short lifespan, it makes it even more incredible. But let's come to.
I would say that on that point, Homi Bhabha's death is quite. I mean, I sit in Geneva, right? So that is where it happened.
Yeah,
I mean,
yes. Wow. Look at how we brought the three cities into discussion.
It's a question which will keep haunting people, right? Like what exactly happened and so on. But yeah, okay, the discussion for another day.
No, absolutely. No, you're right. And unfortunately, in the small history of post-independent India, in terms of you're talking about 70 years history of a 5,000-year-old civilization, we forget of how many setbacks that we've seen. And the late 60s to or the early 70s, these setbacks were absolutely crucial, and cannot be. And that's why I mentioned, started with the Indian space program, cannot be seen without context of the Cold War and the machinations at play at that time. So, having said that, what do having documented our journey so far, what do you think is the path forward? And how hopeful does it make you in terms of Indian space advancement? Do you think we're going to take it up to the next level in terms of more moon explorations and so forth?
I think, I mean, ISRO did talk about some kind of a glide path or some kind of a like a vision today in their post-launch press conferences and so on. But I think more broadly, I see three, four things. Firstly, we also opened the space sector for private sector in the last few years, right? So you see so many space startups which have come up, which are working with ISRO or complementing them, or in some cases even building their own capacities, perhaps even doing their own launches eventually. So I think that is a very, very exciting part, because the use cases in which the space domain can contribute are immense, and I mean different kinds of scientific disciplines can benefit from having strengths in the space domain, be it communications or health, or I mean, eventually when mining becomes one of the big use cases as well, right? Like there's a access to the materials in space, and that's one of the reasons why there's been lately been a frenzy to kind of do more in space, because it's not just about settling humans in on Moon or Mars or wherever, but it's also about like how do you reach asteroids which may be mineral rich, right? So how do you scoop like an asteroid could be like the size of a room or perhaps like a house, but how do you scoop the useful minerals out of that kind of a celestial body? So I think those questions, with startups coming up, you will probably see much more action or excitement in the area, right? So that is like the non-ISRO part of it, which is where ISRO
the public-private partnership, so to speak.
Exactly. And the second part is like you also develop a lot of technologies in this process, right? Like given that it is a complex interplay of electronics and communications and the material sciences. I mean, I saw a video from ISM Dhanbad, right, which is like a big place for mining in the country. So, I mean, places like these, they will get interested in the more core functions, on the building block functions of what leads to a space program. It's not just eventually just launching rockets, but it's also like what kind of materials are you need, like do you need, what research is going on that. So it also builds more core science research, scientific research capability, which will have then multiple purposes. It's not a single-use technology or single-use domain, right? Like you can have cross-purpose use of these technologies, which will be first done for space, but then you can take it to other areas like defense or even civilian or in industry. And I think the third major impact I would see is that it probably, like as we started the discussion with, is that it just builds more interest in the whole core engineering science disciplines. It probably convinces a few more individuals and a few more kids to take up that discipline. And of course, you don't need like millions of people working in that area. You need a few hundreds of committed people who just want to spend their life on these kind of projects, right? So as long as it unearths that talent within the country, that also like a forward path.
No, absolutely, and what you said, it puts us in an elite league of nations. We have to see now what the Pragyan rover does. That's the next thing. I believe they expected the Pragyan rover to be exploring one lunar day, which is 14 days. I think at least that's what I'd read during Chandrayaan 2. I don't know if that's changed or not, but I think that's what it seems like it.
Yeah, I think that's what I read, and just before I logged into this conversation, I think the rover had started, functioning. That's what I saw on some.
Exactly. So what happens, and we'll know in a couple of weeks what has. But this is only the beginning. I mean, I know the excitement and the hoopla and so forth won't be about the results, as it means. But like as a man of science, I want to see what results we get. But this could only be the start of something big. Artemis mission is from NASA is launching an Artemis mission mission to the moon as well, and we are looking like all sorts of exploration and stuff. For Artemis 2 is starting. Artemis 1 happened last year, so it's just fascinating to see a lot of these things happening. And then, like you said, what you use to get there and how it will be applied, how many people it will get, and how many people it inspires to take up other parts of science is, I think, ultimately what the goal is. And then also in the global space race, where it puts India firmly ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the names that we typically hear of, after any such mission, some names become more household, like they just become known, right? So if you see after the launch today, the ISRO director, S. Somnath, he was speaking from the podium, and then he introduced his colleagues, right, who the key individuals were. So these people are, I mean, they must have toiled, I'm sure, for decades to get to today's success, but you wouldn't know them, right? And they've played a big part in propelling countries' imagination forward. But people like P. Veera Muthuval, who was project director, Ritu Srivastav, who was the mission director, and of course was involved in earlier projects in Chandrayaan 2 and Mangalyaan. Then I think he also named three other individuals: Kalpana K, who was the deputy director on this mission on the Chandrayaan 3 project. There was also M. Sankaran, who was the director of the URO Satellite Center, which built the equipment. And I think one Mr. Shrikant he named, who was the mission's operations director. So many individuals like these who have contributed a lot. Otherwise, you wouldn't know them. Like they have such a huge role to play, but these names wouldn't come out. Their successes.
Yes, and I hear a lot of discussion. Like someone asked me yesterday that, do you think if the global media is covering this? They absolutely are. If you go on CNN.com right now and go to the United States page, not the international, United States, it's smack bang on front and center next to Trump's photo. That's how much they're covering that India has landed on the moon, with op-eds and so forth, and where it is. So there is
all the media. In fact, I saw someone collating this kind of a collage of different international media posts, and I think everyone has followed it in quite detail. And I think now my personal sense is that the cynicism which has existed will also keep coming down, right? Because these kind of successes are happening far too often. It cannot be coincidence. Obviously, we are doing something right. So the kind of disdain which cartoons had 10 years ago, I am sure they won't exist now with as each success builds up.
Absolutely. And what is crucial to see is they are not just reports. These are op-ed pieces now coming as well. I saw a lot of my colleagues at work were telling me about this event and stuff. So it's a momentous day. But before we close, I want to ask Ashish a couple of questions. First, obviously, you'll have to end with a recommendation for today. Any recommendations you have for our viewers and listeners? But most importantly, Ashish, given that this is now the norm, right? This is not the once in a blue moon event. We are going to be seeing a lot of space achievements and stuff. What would you like to change in terms of how India talks about its own space program, or something? Like I personally, like, my opinion is, make ISRO more, like, open it up, have like a small space center where kids can come in, families can come in, take a look. Is there anything you would want to change in terms of how ISRO is interacting with the youth and the college kids of this country?
I completely agree on that, Aadit. I think our ability to project ourselves has to certainly improve. Sometimes we tend to be too hard on ourselves. Perhaps there's an imposter syndrome. I don't know, but the machinery in general, and I'm part of that machinery right now. But I think in several areas, like ISRO, for example, they have to have much more interactive way to kind of talk to the external world, right? In terms of what they share, what kind of information they are putting out. It's not that I mean, some of it is just, it has to kind of, you have to let go of the hierarchical way in which we operate in our systems and organizations. What is really required is that, okay, you've done something good, talk about it. I'm not saying that something extra has to be claimed or something has to be amplified without having done it, right? The fact is that we do a lot of good things, we just don't let the world know that we have done them. So, and the other part you mentioned was on the museum. I think that is an absolute. See, in fact, if you see the last 3-4 years, there have been announcements of having some grand museums, right? We have this PM museum in Delhi. There's something coming up in Lothal on maritime history. Of course, five, six such world-class museums are required, because one thing which I observe, and I mean, of course, I've been to Europe several times even earlier, but one thing which you see in Europe is that every town, every village will have some kind of a museum, right? Like and it's not to glorify things, it's just to document things, it's just to kind of, and that becomes like a center of tourist attraction, economic activity, people get employment, you get more close to your roots and what happened in your region and so on. I think that kind of an approach is required. We have just started to do that with some of these mega museums, but a space fund would be really, really great to have.
Absolutely. So, and I'll give a simple example, which is going to sound very silly, but it's true. If you go around Houston, if you go around people who have come from Houston, I guarantee you, me included, we all have had NASA shirts. It's a cool thing to have. How many people in India do you see wearing, ISRO t-shirts? I think we should have more of that. And guys, ISRO can have normal shirts. You do not have to work for ISRO. This is not you're not wearing a military uniform to not wear. So it's something like that. Get that in the pop culture, have shirts about Chandrayaan, Mangalyaan, Vikram lander, many interesting things. So I hope that changes, because we are in the 21st century. We have to think like the 21st century in terms of these things, and whether we like it or not, these pop culture references do matter.
Absolutely. Completely agree on that.
Yeah. So any recommendations you have, Ashish, before we wrap up today?
I can talk about one, I mean, unrelated to space though. So there's a good podcast on India story, like how do you think about macro picture and so on. So there's a podcast with Neelkanth Mishra, who most recently was appointed as the part-time director of the chairperson of the UIDAI, but he's also with Axis Bank. So he had a podcast with Mukesh Bansal, the famed e-commerce entrepreneur. It's called Sparks. I think that's the show name, and I think that was a wonderful podcast. I'm also currently reading a book by Vaclav Smil on the interplay between energy and civilization. So, but I'm not fully done with yet. So perhaps next time we'll talk more.
Yes. My recommendations would be, one, watch film The Nambi Effect by Mar Madhavan about Nambi Narayanan, and how they did. I mean, they are all vital cogs, and in the show Rocket Boys, like I told you. I too started actually reading a book called G-Man, which won the Pulitzer Prize last year, which was a biography of J. Edgar Hoover, but I'm not done yet. It's again, like Ashish, I'm going to wait to see my recommendations on that. It's an 850-page book, so it's probably going to be a little few days before I'm done reading on that. But what a day for India, and thank you, Ashish, so much for joining us and celebrating it on Mind Podcast with all of us. Today we are all those engineers in ISRO celebrating wherever we are.
Absolutely. Thanks, Aadit, and congratulations to everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, guys. We'll be back later this weekend to do this. This was a special podcast just focused on the Chandrayaan thing. Please like, share. Please follow Ashish on social media. We'll tag his handle and it will be posted. And please write to us with any questions you have. Till then, it's goodbye, and we'll be back shortly.